Hello, this is Sondra Oster Baras bringing you a few words of Bible from the heart of Biblical Israel. This week's Torah portion is Ekev. Ekev is actually a very funny word. It means, in this context, it means resulting from, or if, it's just this kind of conjunction type of word, like if you will listen, it's that, if, or by the by, or something like that. But the word itself means heal. So it's actually a very interesting word, and there's this little bit of a commentary about it that says, what do you mean this heal? Why this word? Instead of just using the usual if, okay, which would be im, instead saying ekev. And so there's like a hint here, and this is a very classic commentary. There's a hint here that says, you have to be very careful with all the commandments that God has commanded us, even those that you would normally ignore because you would think they were so petty. And this is the reference to the heel, even those that you would kind of grind your heel on, like you step on it. It's not important, like you treat it like a fly or a speck of dirt. It's one of these minor things. It's not important. And here there is that kind of hint that no, everything that God is commanding us, even if it seems kind of petty, is definitely important. But I want to focus more. There's something else in the same first verse that I think is very, very interesting. And it says, this, of course, first verse introduces this whole idea of the importance of obeying God's commandments. And this is something we will see throughout the book of Deuteronomy. We've already seen it, and we will continue to see it. But here in this first verse, we say, and if you will listen to these laws, these statutes, and you will observe them and do them, and you will, then the Lord your God will keep his covenant and his kindness, which he swore, promised to your forefathers. And that's very interesting. Covenant, we understand. We have covenant spelled out, and we have a lot of the rules that are here are kind of a fleshing out of this idea of a covenant, that if we obey God's commands, he will give us rewards, and if we disobey, he will give us punishments. But what's the kindness? Okay, because the covenant sets things out very, very clearly. There's rewards and there's punishments, and we know exactly what we're supposed to do and what are the consequences. So what place is there for kindness? And definitely there is place for kindness. And we see that in a number of places. Deuteronomy 30, for example, is an amazing example. Right after the lengthy covenant that we will see at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, there's this place for return, for restoration. Even though there was a breach of the covenant and the people of Israel have been dispersed as the ultimate punishment, there will be a return. But we also see a similar idea just previous in the previous chapter, a few chapters earlier that we read last week's Torah portion in chapter 4. We have verse 22. Okay. No, that wasn't it. Verse 25. Okay, beginning in verse 25, we have a number of verses in chapter 4 that tells us, again, what will happen if you sin. And we have in verse 27 that God will disperse us, throughout the nations. We will remain a very small number of people. We will there serve idols. And this is something that we'll see in a few different places. But then we get this wonderful, wonderful change. Okay, in 29. From there, you will see God. Okay. And what will therefore happen? You will, in verse 30, you will return to the Lord your God. You will listen to his voice. And then in verse 30, because God is a merciful God, he will not leave you and he will not destroy you. Okay. And he will not forget the covenant with the forefathers that he promised to them. Again, and this actually is the kindness then. The kindness, and even here it says the kindness that he promised to our forefathers. Because on the one hand, you have a covenant where if there's a breach of the covenant, there's punishment. But on the other hand, there was that ultimate promise to our forefathers that we would have the land, that God would be with us forever. And so it's the forever part of that. It's that that part of the covenant that is not reliant on any conditions. It is an unconditional covenant. That is where the kindness comes in. Or in some ways, I believe it might even be translated as grace. Okay, there's this idea that there's a God of justice, a God of rules, but beyond the God of rules is a God of mercy, and that is a God that is able to promise unconditionally, even if we will sin, we will get our punishment, but yet that relationship will remain with us forever. Then the Torah portion continues in chapter 8 with a wonderful, wonderful summary of what was going on in the desert. Now, we've tracked the nation of Israel through the desert from Exodus through Numbers. We have seen all kinds of situations, and including, particularly in the book of Numbers, many situations where the nation of Israel seems to be completely unappreciative of what God has given them, of the miracles, of the salvation, and despite the long time in the desert, has sinned very often, has complained, has done all kinds of things with acts of rebellion, etc. And here, for the first time, in chapter 8, there's sort of giving credence to the fact that life was really hard. But it's very interesting because in chapter 8, we have both that it was hard and it was also miraculous. So, for example, in verse 3, you suffered, you were starving, and then you ate the manna, okay, which you have never seen before. And you learn from that you don't, that, and this is, of course, a very famous quote, man does not live on bread alone. But what is the context of that? Okay, but rather on what God says man will live. So there is a recognition that living on manna is not fun. Okay, yes, they weren't starving, but it wasn't fun. It was hard. It was really hard. But the lesson was you can survive even if you don't have good food, so long as you have the word of God and the protection of God. But that's a difficult lesson. And I think here in chapter 8, there is a recognition of that. And then we go on to another kind of miracle, that their clothes did not wear out and their feet did not develop infections for 40 years. Again, this is clearly a miracle on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's an understanding that they're wearing the same clothes for 40 years, and it's a miracle that their legs didn't get infections, but on the other hand, they're walking and walking and walking. This is not fun, okay? And then, of course, that we have the transition of going into the land of Israel, which is here we have in verse 8, it is a land. And we have what we know as the seven species that the land of Israel is blessed with them. We have wheat and barley and the vineyards, figs, pomegranates, olive, and honey. And this honey actually is referred to what we call today silan. This is dates, okay? So we have wheat and barley and grapes and figs and pomegranate, olives, and dates. And these are the seven species. And it goes on to reflect the blessing that the land of Israel will give to them. In contrast to the suffering of the desert, they are now going into a very, very blessed land with all these wonderful things. It goes in to tell us also about the presence of natural springs, of metals, of all kinds of things like that. And then verse 10, and this is probably very important for all of us all times. You will eat, you will feel full, and you will bless the Lord your God for the wonderful land that he has given you. And this is seen to be a verse that kind of is a law in this verse. Embedded in this verse is the idea that you must thank God. We too, and many of our friends who are not Jewish will offer a prayer to God before they partake of food. To recognize here the food that is before us, we must thank God before we partake of the food. It's kind of like it's not yours until you recognize that it came from God. Otherwise, you're like stealing it, okay? But here it tells us after you finish eating, you also have to bless God. And this, I believe, is something that is unique to Judaism. The prayer that we say after we finish the meal, in addition to the prayer we say before we begin our meal, and it comes from here. But many times people don't pay attention to the end of the verse. It's not just thanking God for your food, it's thanking God for the food that he has produced from this wonderful land. Now, of course, the Jews bless and pray for the food and grace after the meals all over the world. But the truth of the matter, this is a blessing that reflects primarily on the land of Israel. So for us here living in the land of Israel, when we have a meal and we thank God for the fruits of this land that we have now consumed, we are not just thanking God for filling our bellies, we are thanking God for the amazing land that he has given to us, a land that is full of miracle, that is full of promise, that is full of blessing, and we must always, always remember that. Have a wonderful weekend. Shabbat Shalom.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at CFOIC.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.